It's funny, you look at a smartphone today and it feels like you're holding the absolute pinnacle of human progress.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
just so clean, it's rational, it's, this sleek piece of cold glass and
Yeah, it
silicon.
feels entirely detached from, like, the ancient world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You tap a screen and you instantly have access to all of human knowledge. It feels totally removed from primitive campfire stories and thunder gods.
It really does. It's like we feel we've completely outgrown the dark woods, and the monsters that used to live in them.
Right.
We look at our tech and we sort of like to think of ourselves as thoroughly, irresistibly modernized.
But then, I mean, you actually look at what we're doing on those screens,
Yeah.
the obsessions, the anger, the desperate attempts to just feel connected to someone. And suddenly that shiny device isn't a window into a rational future at all.
No, not at all.
It's a mirror. And it's reflecting the exact same primal terrors and desires that we had like thousands of years ago.
It is the absolute definition of a technological illusion.
Hmm.
I mean, we've updated the hardware, we've given it a high-definition display, but the human operating system running underneath,
Yeah.
it's exactly the same as it was in the Bronze Age.
Which brings us to you, our listener, and our mission for today. Welcome to your custom-tailored deep dive.
And it's a big one today.
It really is. You handed us a massive stack of 15 different video sources and asked us to do basically a comprehensive morning roundup.
It is quite a stack to get through, I have to say.
Oh, yeah. We are spanning everything from evolutionary biology and Orthodox Christian sermons to the absolute bleeding edge frontiers of AI.
And some fiercely contested political debates, too.
Right. So our goal today is to give you that morning roundup by extracting the core idea, like the absolute most valuable nugget of knowledge from each of these videos. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, when you look at these 15 different sources, at first glance, they seem completely chaotic.
Oh, totally random.
Right. But if you look closely, there is this really fascinating thread connecting every single piece of the puzzle.
And what is that?
It's humanity's desperate search for meaning, for connection and for truth in an increasingly confusing and noisy world.
So I feel like we have to start with how our minds are actually processing this modern landscape. There's a video in the stack on mythology from a channel called Ink and Fantasy.
Yes, I watched that one.
And the core argument here is that modernity didn't actually kill mythology, it just relocated it.
Right.
Like, we used to look up at a thunderstorm and explain the terrifying unknown by saying, well, that's Zeus, or we'd feel an earthquake and see Poseidon.
And now?
Now we just use internet lore.
What's really fascinating here is the mechanism behind why we do this. The source points out that the fire around which we sit to tell stories has simply changed shape.
Right, it's a glowing screen now.
Exactly. And sure, we no longer fear literal lake spirits, but we are absolutely terrified of, like, what might be hiding in the deep ocean trenches.
Or what's looking back at us from outer space.
Exactly. They mention things like TikTok cryptids and the SCP Foundation.
And just to pause here for you listening, if you aren't deep into internet rabbit holes, what exactly is the SCP Foundation?
Right. So it's essentially this massive collaborative internet fiction project. People write these highly detailed clinical reports about a fictional organization.
Oh, right.
And this organization captures and studies supernatural monsters and anomalies. It reads like declassified government documents.
Wow.
And the point the video makes is that this is our modern folklore. The shapes of our monsters have modernized to sound scientific and bureaucratic, but the fear itself hasn't changed one bit.
And because that primal fear is still there, the search for comfort is still there. Which leads us to a really unsettling reality discussed on the Theology podcast.
Oh boy, yeah. This one was intense.
They get into the terrifying rise of what's being called grief tech and AI religion.
Yes, and this is where the conversation gets incredibly dark. I mean, people are now paying by the minute to text or talk to an AI Jesus or an AI Buddha avatar.
It's wild.
But it goes way beyond abstract religion. The source detailed a real-world case where the parents of a victim of the Parkland school shooting used generative AI to essentially reanimate their dead son.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They fed his voice and text messages into an AI just so they could hear his digital ghost say, "I love you," every single morning.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Like, are we just upgrading our emotional pacifiers?
How do you mean?
Well, interacting with an AI Jesus or a digital ghost of a loved one to me, that feels exactly like eating a giant bag of potato chips when you're starving for actual spiritual nutrition.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right? It feels filling for about 10 seconds, but it is completely soulless.
Yeah.
And the lack of real nutrients is slowly killing you.
That is the perfect analogy.
Mhm.
And the danger they highlight is that we are substituting real soul care, which is difficult, and requires vulnerability for a sycophantic digital illusion.
Yeah. Sycophantic is the right word.
Think about how this technology actually works. The AI only caters to our emotive selves. It's programmed to tell us exactly what we want to hear.
Right. It never pushes back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't challenge us. It doesn't point out our flaws. It just endlessly feeds our narcissism.
And that digital isolation is completely warping our reality, which actually brings in the insights from Warren Smith on the Trigonometry channel.
Yes.
The central idea he brings to this morning roundup is that the internet has essentially weaponized mental illness through parasocial relationships.
Right. People are getting completely wedded to brand narratives instead of the real world.
Yeah.
They're spending their days just like screaming at strangers in comment sections because their entire digital life has absolutely no grounding in physical, tangible reality.
And a video from a creator named Richard the Fourth puts a name to this phenomenon. He explains that social media traps us in what he calls an egoic frame.
And to break that down for you, the egoic frame is this endless, exhausting war of my team versus your team.
Yeah.
Yeah, the endless culture war stuff.
Exactly. And he references traditionalist thinkers like René Guénon to contrast this.
Okay, Guénon, what's his angle?
So Guénon's philosophy argues that true tradition is based on a spiritual hierarchy where the spirit is objectively higher than matter.
Okay.
The insight here is that true spiritual tradition sits entirely outside this modern online ego war. It just doesn't participate in the comments section screaming matches.
But because so many people are trapped in that digital egoic frame, our political discourse has just completely lost its anchor to reality.
It really has.
And that transitions us into the political arena of our roundup today. And just a quick note to you listening, looking at this stack of sources, we are being completely objective. We're simply mapping out the mechanics of these political arguments as they appear in the videos. We are not endorsing any specific side here.
Right, exactly. We are just looking at the machinery of the debate.
And the machinery, according to Warren Smith, is completely broken. His core observation is that critical thinking is dead because people use highly charged terms without actually knowing what those words mean.
Yes. He breaks down this fascinating interaction he had with a political strategist.
I remember this part.
So the strategist confidently called Donald Trump a fascist. But when Smith pressed him to simply define what fascism actually is, the strategist completely froze.
He had no idea.
He couldn't do it.
And Smith goes on to point out the actual definition, which was invented by Giovanni Gentile in Italy.
Right.
Fascism specifically means the state and the individual are conjoined. It's the concept of the fasces, the bundle of sticks that won't break when tied together.
Right.
In that ideology, the individual is the state, and literally nothing exists outside the state.
It's like modern politics is this high-stakes game of telephone, but everyone forgot the original phrase.
That's exactly it.
If you don't know the actual definition of fascism, or you just carelessly throw around extreme terms like Nazi or pedophile purely based on, loose guilt by association, you aren't engaging in politics anymore. You're just violently arguing over vibes.
And that loss of definition has incredibly dangerous real-world consequences. The source notes, it directly fuels political violence and assassination attempts.
It's terrifying.
Words have lost their meaning, but they haven't lost their capacity to incite real danger.
Meanwhile, as the left struggles with definitions, the source material shows this massive structural earthquake happening on the right.
Yes.
Richard IV outlines a major generational shift here, and again, just objectively reporting the source.
Right. The mechanics of this shift are really interesting. He argues that the older brand of conservatism, which is heavily neoconservative, free market focused, deeply supportive of foreign interventions.
Right, the old guard.
Yeah, that it's losing massive ground to a much more nationalist, America First messaging, specifically among younger demographics.
And looking at how this argument is spreading, the source points out that this nationalist wing is functionally winning the narrative war. And why is that? Because massive figures in the podcasting space are adopting it.
Oh, absolutely.
You have huge audiences listening to Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan, Piers Morgan, and they're openly questioning the billions being spent on the war in Ukraine. or heavily criticizing foreign policy regarding Israel.
And the fundamental shift here is why they are criticizing it. It's a total rejection of the old neoconservative consensus.
Okay.
These podcasters and younger voters are increasingly viewing these conflicts not as moral imperatives for democracy, but as projects of international finance capital that actively harm the domestic working class.
So if the definitions of words are collapsing and entire political ideologies are just shifting overnight, how do you even navigate a landscape this chaotic?
It's tough.
Well, Jay Dyer's video drops a brutal but necessary piece of advice for our roundup. You have to read the primary sources.
Yeah.
If you don't want to be dismissed as a conspiracy theorist, ditch the tweets. If you want to know what the global elite believe or what a political movement actually stands for, go read their actual books.
Well, if we connect all of this to the bigger picture, this endless political infighting and digital tribalism forces us to ask a much deeper question.
Which is?
Why do human beings form groups to cooperate or fight in the first place? And that takes us to the biological and evolutionary arguments in your stack of sources.
Right. Let's step back from the political chaos and zoom way out. We have a video from Paul Vanderklay analyzing a discussion between evolutionary biologists Brett Weinstein and Heather Hine.
Yeah.
And they're talking about vultures and poison frogs.
Which sounds incredibly random, I know. But the core idea they extract is evolutionary convergence.
Okay, what exactly does that mean in this context?
It means that certain animals, completely independent of one another, evolved on totally different continents to fill the exact same ecological niches. Yeah. They developed the same solutions to the same environmental problems without ever interacting. And this is where the biology bleeds into theology.
Oh, interesting.
For some thinkers, this convergence hints at what is called an arenic God.
Wait, arenic, like an arena. Usually when people talk about God, they talk about an agentic God, like a specific agent, a guy in the sky pulling levers and strings.
Exactly. An arenic God is the idea that God acts as the very arena itself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, God is the environment, the overarching structure of reality that shapes and molds life to fit certain moral and physical patterns over time, almost like gravity.
But then you have to deal with the purely evolutionary view of human behavior, right?
Yeah.
Specifically regarding religion.
Right.
The argument presented by thinkers like Weinstein and Bart Ehrman is that religion is essentially just an evolutionary hack.
And to understand this, you have to look at the game theory of biology. The main idea here is that altruistic groups, people who are willing to sacrifice themselves for the good of the tribe, will always outcompete selfish groups in nature.
That makes sense.
If my tribe fights for each other and your tribe only cares about themselves, my tribe wins the war.
But there is a massive flaw in that system, right? The cheater problem.
Precisely. Altruistic groups are incredibly vulnerable to internal cheaters.
What's a cheater in this context?
A cheater is someone who takes all the protection and benefits of the group, but refuses to sacrifice anything themselves. They hoard the resources. So from a purely biological standpoint, religion is viewed as the immune system against cheaters. It provides the terrifying, all-seeing God and the strict rules required to suppress selfishness and keep the group cohesive.
Hold on, I have to push back on this.
Go for it.
That feels incredibly cynical. Are evolutionary biologists seriously arguing that thousands of years of human self-sacrifice, profound art, and spiritual beauty are just like a mathematical formula to stop people from hoarding extra berries in the cave?
It does sound a bit reductive when you put it like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Does that evolutionary theory actually explain grace?
Well, that is exactly the counter-argument Paul Vanderklay explores. The theological insight here is that true conversion and true human goodness don't actually come from a tyrant God enforcing rules just to maximize survival rates.
Yeah, he uses the story of the Philippian jailer to prove this.
Right.
The jailer is ready to commit suicide after an earthquake breaks open the prison doors. He assumes all the prisoners have fled and he'll be executed by the Romans anyway.
Yeah.
But the Apostle Paul doesn't run. He stays. He offers the jailer unexpected, completely irrational grace.
And if you extrapolate that, the Christian argument is that Jesus won history not by domination and certainly not by evolutionary superiority, but by willingly losing on the cross.
Wow.
Biology perfectly explains survival, but it entirely fails to explain the profound human response to radical, unmerited grace.
Which brings us to the concept of courage. If we aren't just fighting for biological survival, what makes us brave?
That's the question.
A channel called Geeky Stoics provided a brilliant nugget for this roundup. True courage doesn't come from abstract concepts or political ideologies. It comes from local, personal bonds.
It's the protective drive.
Yes. I loved the analogy they used. They compared it to the Mandalorian protecting the child. We fight for what we love.
Exactly.
They quoted Winston Churchill, who noted that you must fight when you can win easily, so you aren't forced to fight when the odds are completely against you and there is no hope.
But to be that strong, to be the rock that the waves break against you, have to be grounded in something far deeper than yourself. Family, friends, or God.
Right.
Because if you're just relying on your own ego, returning to that egoic frame we discussed earlier, you will eventually crumble under the weight of it.
And that reality of crumbling moves us from the macro-level theories of evolution right down into the deeply intimate, personal level of human suffering.
Yeah, this is the hard stuff.
In our final segment of this morning roundup, we look at trauma and ultimate healing. In Paul Vanderklay's conversation with Everett Vroon, we confront the actual cost of caring.
Right. They tackle the dangerous myth that helpers don't need help. Therapists, pastors, medical workers, they deeply suffer from secondary traumatic stress.
Vroon compared it to the biblical prophet Elijah running out into the desert after a massive, miraculous victory. He just wanted to die.
Yeah.
Sometimes the greatest temptation you face in life isn't a specific, terrible sin. The greatest temptation is just the overwhelming, exhausting desire to give up fighting entirely.
And that feeling of total exhaustion and abandonment is perfectly captured in a sermon we reviewed from Saints Peter and Paul Orthodox Church.
Okay, tell us about that one.
The speaker contrasts two different biblical paralytics. You have the famous one whose friends were so dedicated to his healing that they literally tore off a roof to lower him down to Christ.
Right, everyone knows that story.
But the focus of this insight is on the other paralytic, the man lying by the pool of Bethesda. He didn't have friends tearing off roofs for him. He was completely abandoned, lying there for 38 years, and Christ approaches him and asks what seems, on the surface, like a wildly cruel question to ask a paralyzed man.
What does he ask?
He asks, "Do you want to be healed?"
It sounds absurd, honestly.
It does. But it's incredibly profound. Because true healing requires fundamental change. When Christ does heal him, he gives him a specific command. Take up your bed.
Right.
He makes the man carry the very wooden mat that crushed him for 38 years and walk away with it. He doesn't get to just erase his past. He has to carry the heavy evidence of his healing.
So what does this all mean for us today? A sermon from St. Nectarios gives us the answer. The core idea is that spiritual growth requires wrestling with God, just as the patriarch Jacob literally wrestled the angel in the Old Testament.
Right.
You have to actively kill the old man, your past destructive self.
And the crucial point here is that God doesn't wrestle with us to hinder us. He wrestles with us to bolster us, to give us the spiritual muscle and the courage to face impossible odds. Jacob refused to let go of the angel until he received his blessing. But in the process of that struggle, God dislocated Jacob's hip.
He left him with a lifelong limp. And wait, this is where all these sources just beautifully collide.
How so?
Jacob's dislocated hip is the therapist's secondary trauma. It's the paralytic carrying his heavy wooden bed. True healing doesn't mean magically erasing your past so you look perfect and pristine.
Right.
Healing means you earned a limp. The scar is the tangible proof that you were brave enough to step into the arena, face your own brokenness, and wrestle with reality until you finally got the blessing.
That completely reframes how we view our daily struggles. It's not a punishment. It's participation in reality.
Which brings us to the final astonishing story from Saints Peter and Paul, the Christian mandate that death itself is dead.
This was the story that gave me literal chills. It completely transcends all the rational biological logic we just talked about.
It really does. A priest recounted a story of a baby born on the Feast of Theophany. The baby was stillborn?
Dead for 7 minutes. No breathing, no heartbeat. The midwife, in an absolute panic, performed an emergency baptism right there in the delivery room.
And the baby miraculously began to breathe.
Yes.
And not only that, after 7 minutes without a steady supply of oxygen, the baby suffered 0 brain damage.
It's incredible.
It's a stark, undeniable reminder that beneath all our loud political debates and our neat evolutionary theories, there are profound mysteries of grace and healing that completely defy our modern materialistic explanations.
It is the ultimate pushback against a world that tells us we are just meat machines driven by biological impulses.
So looking back at our morning roundup, we have covered incredible ground for you today.
We really have.
We started with the terrifying digital ghosts of AI grief tech and the screaming, definitionless echo chambers of modern politics. We zoomed out to the biological roots of why we cooperate, the game theory of evolutionary cheaters, and finally arrived at the deeply personal reality of secondary trauma, spiritual wrestling, and miraculous healing.
It's a journey from the artificial, frictionless illusions we build on our smartphones to comfort ourselves, all the way down to the stark, unavoidable reality of our own souls.
Beautifully said.
And looking at all this, it leaves us with something vital to ponder.
What's that?
Well, if our technology is advancing so rapidly that we will soon be able to erase all friction, using AI to simulate dead loved ones so we never feel grief, or curating our digital lives so we never face a dissenting opinion what happens to humanity when we finally succeed in making ourselves perfectly comfortable. If the limp is the proof that we wrestled the angel, and carrying our bed is the proof that we were healed, do we actually lose our souls the moment we use technology to stop wrestling?